before we start talking about the deficit, let's talk about why we have one in the first place. Now, if you listen to Meg Whitman and her team during the election, you might think it's because of out-of-control spending or so-called waste, fraud, and abuse, which, incidentally enough, never gets more specific than that. Well, unsurprisingly, she's wrong. When you look at the actual numbers, state spending per person is actually at the lowest level since the early 1970s. And again, you may have heard the charge that we have a large bloated bureaucracy. But looking at the numbers, California is actually 46th in the nation in state workers. So if we're not spending a lot, and if we don't have a large state workforce, why do we have a deficit? Anyone want to venture a guess? Taxes? That's halfway correct.
Big part of it.
So what happened right in 2008? Other than President Obama.
Schwarzenegger took loans.
Isabel got it. The economy went into a nosedive with the recession. And because of the recession, people have less money. And since they make less money, they pay less taxes. So the state takes in less, and as a result, we have a huge deficit. This year's to the tune of $25 billion, which is really no joke. Now, our party's plan for closing this deficit is actually pretty encouraging. It's on the handout, that second slide with the pie charts. So whereas Governor Schwarzenegger wanted to solve our budget 100% through cuts, Jerry Brown's taking a more balanced half-and-half approach. But that still leaves us with $12.5 billion in spending cuts. Now, some of the big programs that get hit are redevelopment agencies, for which the state provides local governments money to attract new businesses, Medi-Cal, which is our state's health insurance program for low-income children and families, which is ironic, because on the federal level, we're moving ahead towards universal health care, and on the state level, we're scaling it back. And then there's CalWorks, which is our state's welfare to work program. Whereas Governor Schwarzenegger wanted to eliminate it entirely, thankfully Jerry Brown's not doing that, but still the program is going to be just hanging by a thread. And again, during the worst downturn since the Great Depression, we're scaling back our social safety net. It doesn't really make much sense to me. And then there's the part which affects us most as students, which is the $1.4 billion that's going to be cut from higher education. Now, there is some good news in this budget. Not much, but it is there. First of all, this budget is honest. Now, I was actually surprised to learn the statistic, but over the past 3 years, 75 to 85% of our budget solutions have either been temporary or gimmicks. Now, during his campaign, Governor Brown promised he would put forth an honest budget, and to his credit, he's done that. It's one of the reasons why this looks so bad. So the upside of that is that if this passes, we will actually close our deficit, and we won't keep having to do this dance year after year after year. So that's the first piece of good news. The second piece of good news is that K-12 education gets spared. Now, under the Schwarzenegger administration, it got hit so hard that right now we've decided it can't take any more, and this time it is getting a pass. Now, this will only be true if the governor's tax extensions are passed by the voters. And then there's bad news and a lot more, but again, this is also on the handout we just gave you. In terms of higher education, the UC system gets cut by $500 million, which is around 20% of its budget. And this is on top of the 20% of its budget that was 20% of state support. And this is on top of the 20% that was already cut over the past 2 years. So in 3 years, the state will have scaled back its support for the UC by over 1/3. And for the first time in its over 100-year history, students will pay more for their education than the state does. So when you hear people talking about the privatization of higher education, this statistic is not encouraging. Now the CSU system also gets cut by $500 million, also around 20% of its budget. And this will have consequences. Statewide, the CSU will have to cut its enrollment by 5%, which again doesn't really make much sense. You have students who are qualified for a degree, students who want to get a degree, and we're not going to let them. Now if we try to get out of our recession, again, probably not the smartest move. And then there's the California community colleges. Now there are over 100 of these colleges, and they service hundreds of thousands of students across our state. And they don't always get the attention they deserve. But in Governor Brown's proposed budget, they're going to be cut by $400 million. And this will have consequences.
As many of you remember, when he ran for governor, he talked about no new taxes without voter approval. And that's what's happening. We're going to ask for taxes, which actually, I should clarify, are not new taxes. They're extensions of taxes that we're already paying as Californians 5-year extension taxes, and that'll affect the sales tax, income tax, and vehicle license fees. But it's only a 1%, 0.25%, and 0.5% fee. So I mean, these are not going to add up to much money for all of us as Californians, but it will go a really long way collectively towards saving what could be much more devastating cuts if the taxes aren't implemented. So it's really important, as I just mentioned, to point out to people that this is an extension of existing taxes, not a new one. Polling that's been done about the California electorate to see how people feel about this really shows that people are more willing to accept the idea if they come to terms with the fact that they're already paying these and they don't see them as new taxes. Assuming that the budget gets passed, the special elections will be a very big battle, and we're all going to need to participate in that to make sure that these special tax extensions do pass, because if they don't,
it's going to be bad. Here's a quote from the San Jose Mercury News illustrating how big our deficit is. How big is a $28.1 billion deficit? It represents a third of the state's general fund. Lawmakers could close every state prison, cut off funding to every university and community college, close all 280 state parks, and fire every highway patrol officer, and it still wouldn't close the gap.
Mark Leno, who's a state senator, as many of you probably know, asked the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, to basically project what the cuts would be if this doesn't, if the tax extensions don't go through. And the UC and CSUs could expect another $1.1 billion in cuts, around 10%, higher fees, lower enrollment, 5 to 10% lower salaries for employees. Community colleges would get another $585 million in cuts, and fees would increase from $26 to $66, which would be just a really dramatic increase at the community college level, more than twofold increase in fees that would result in hundreds of thousands of people, I think, getting pushed out of the community college system because they wouldn't be able to afford it. K through 12 education would actually get the highest cut out of any sector of the budget. They are projected to get $4.6 billion in cuts if the special election fails.
When's the election taking place?
They haven't officially set a date yet, but it looks like it will be sometime in June.
So assuming that the budget passes at some point in the next couple of days, that's when we'll find out, when the election is scheduled.
Right. And there is a hurdle there, because since it is late June, most colleges are actually not in session. So if you're registered to vote at your address in Mills, or you get your absentee ballot sent to Mills, but you're not going to be in Mills, you will have to re-register to vote. And we actually have forms right here, so you can get that done before you even leave this room. You can also visit our website, cacollegedems.org, which is along the bottom of this button.
We learn every day.
We do have an action page where you can send an email to your legislators with literally the click of a button. And we will have other action opportunities popping up. So bookmark it, visit it from time to time. We try to make it as easy as possible to get involved.
And then the last thing that we just wanted to say was just sort of a point about the future, which is, we're spending so much time here in California right now kind of playing defense. And hopefully when we get out of the economy recovers and we avoid these big cuts, in the long term we can actually reinvest in education and in all these things that matter to us and are important to the prosperity of our future.